Have you done your estate planning? Have you looked into wills, estates, and trusts? Well, our next guest works in the field and has some very important information to share with us today. She is Karen Skyers. Welcome. Thanks for being us.
Thank you, Clarence, for having me today.
As an attorney who works with wills, just let people know why that's important.
It's so important for people to have a will. A will first is, let me tell you what it is. It's a legal document that disposes of one's property once that person is deceased. So the reason for you to have a will is many reasons. So one, if you have children, minor children, you want to know who will care for your children after that. Who is going to take your property, whether it be your home, your real estate property, or even your personal property. So it allows you as the individual while you're living to decide how your property will be disposed of.
Now, some people might say, well, I told all my kids what they're going to get, so isn't that good enough if I just tell them?
Absolutely not. Right? We live in a world where we are governed by laws. So unfortunately, just a verbal commitment is not going to be sufficient. If your mom or your dad or your rich uncle says to you, I'm going to leave you something, please make sure that it is in writing, in a will, and that you sit down with the lawyer to talk about that.
You know, without a will, there comes this word that I think a lot of people think is the norm, but it's not, and it's called probate. That's not the norm. It's not something you want to do or something you have to do if you have a will.
That's correct. In Florida, everything doesn't have to go through probate, but what ends up happening is probate is a legal process where the court decides how your property is going to be distributed and to whom. So if there's a will, the will tell the court directly, this is where this is going. This house goes to child A, B, or C. If there's no will, then that's called intestate. And when someone dies without a will, their property is going to be distributed based on Florida state laws or any state that you live in. So whatever state you die in, if that's where your property is and that's where you live in, that is where the court will decide how your property will be distributed based on, again, state law. So it'll go to your spouse if you have one, it'll go to your children, and then it goes on and on after that. So if you don't want your husband or your children or your cousins to come and take some of your stuff, then this is why it's important to sit down with an attorney and talk about this. We don't really do this in the African American and the Hispanic Latino communities. And so it's very important for me to discuss this issue because we've reached an age where our parents are aging in place, our parents are aging out of place. And sometimes, you know, we don't know. Tomorrow is not promised. So it's always safe to do this while you're still living.
And you are an attorney. However, I'm going to ask you for a little psychology here. Tell people why having a will does not mean you're going to die the next day.
You know, I've heard this so many times. It's just some type of superstition or something of that nature. Unfortunately, so many people believe that it's a bad luck to have a will. It's really probably the smartest thing that a person can do to have a will. That way we can avoid fish fries. That way you can avoid GoFundMes. That way you can even avoid the trauma and what happens to your loved ones after you pass away while they're trying to deal with losing a loved one.
Then there are two very distinct paths. When there is the probate path, and then there is the path of people who have a will.
Correct.
They're night and day. And can you give people an idea of if someone dies and has a will, how much easier it is and versus what probate looks like? Sure.
So when someone dies and they have a will, the will should be very specific and it'll say what property goes to whom. So if you're getting the china set, the will state you will get the china set will go to child A or whoever you want to leave it to, right? It can be a charitable gift or whoever you want to leave your property to. And then the judge can accept that and you go and you avoid the entire probate process. Now, when you go through a probate process, that can be costly, that can be very time consuming, Again, you're dealing with losing someone. So as you're trying to deal with the pain of, death of a loved one, then what ends up happening is you have to deal with an entire legal process. You have to hire an attorney. Again, it's super costly, it's time consuming, and then again, your property is going to be distributed based on the law. So the government is going to say what happens to your furniture, what happens to your car, who gets what's inside of your home, whether it's a beautiful painting or your grandmother's ring. So that's why it's important, again, I'm going to say this again and again, it's important to have a will. No matter how much or how little you have, you get to decide when you're alive how you want that distributed upon your death.
And for those who don't want the government in their business, this is the way to do it. Now, I want to also talk about estate planning as a whole, because a will is just one component of an
Correct.
estate plan. Why
Correct.
is that important to have as well?
The estate plan is also is again something else that is used to protect assets. And it can include things for your children, for your family. You can even plan for incapacitation, right? Because as we're talking about wills, we're talking about people dying, right? And however, what if you don't die? What if you become incapacitated while you're still living? There are certain documents that are going to state legally who will be your personal representative, who will handle all of your affairs, whether they're legal, personal, or professional. That is going to be important when you have everything written down. And it just can't be written down as in, I'm going to use a napkin today. This has to be sit down with an attorney. There's so many different avenues depending on the individual assets and depending on, the family structure. Whether you're a single person would be very different from a married person. Whether you have children or no children is going to be different. So I think that the best and the wisest thing to do for anyone that has anything or is breathing right now to have a will, to have a life insurance policy where they can name a beneficiary so you'll know where that is going, because it's also important to be able to afford your own funeral.
Exactly. And we only have a few seconds, but just can you explain what a trust is and how that works and who might need one?
Yeah, so a trust is, again, another process where it's going to explain how your property is going to be distributed. Your bank accounts can be in there, your real estate property can be in there, your 401k, whatever it is that you want to put into a trust, that trust is going to state exactly what and how your real property and personal property will be distributed and managed.
Karen, thank you so much. This has been such valuable information.
Thank you for having me.
And stay with us, there's more Legal Connections coming up.